come back in and be with us. We'd love that. Guys, church lunch today. Who's excited about church lunch? Who made something for church lunch? 4 of you. I tried. I made a cake last night because I thought, church lunch, Proverbs 31 woman, I'm going to kill this. I'm going to make a cake. I'm going to do all the things and come to church lunch. And I burnt the cake. And then I was like, that's okay because you can slice it off the top. And then I tipped it out. And you know when half stays in the tin and half doesn't? I was like, why am I bothering? So I failed at being but it was only to make all of the rest of you that are also popping down to Aldi in between now and church lunch. It was just to make you feel better. So just to make you relate to me. But yes, there is church lunch. And if you're visiting, we would love to have you stay with us, even if you haven't planned to. And it's a good opportunity to get to know each other and to just kind of, even spend that time asking questions about the church and finding out more about who we are. So that's that. If you're new also, we are right in the middle of a series right now called From Vision to Victory. And we are in the book of Joshua. So if you have your Bibles, then if you turn to the book of Joshua, and we're going to start there. And when I say moving through, we're kind of trickling through a series. We did half a verse last week, half a verse at the beginning of chapter 2. Can anyone remember? It was 2 weeks ago, so I might stretch you. Can anyone remember? Turn to the person next to you. If you're visiting, you're okay. You're allowed. Just talk to the person next to you quickly. What did we talk about last week? Last time? Anyone remember? Just. Okay, you can't talk that long about it. Somebody tell me just a one-liner. Anyone over here? Were you just all talking about the weather right then? Somebody over here? Go on, be brave. Sent some spies out, yeah. We're at that moment where Joshua sent some spies into the land of, into the promised land. Anyone else over here tell us anything about that sermon? He revisited, that's right. God, he went in as a spy 40 years ago. It didn't go well. And some would say, don't do that again, Joshua. But Joshua was like, God said that was a good idea last time. I'm going to go back in again. And we talked about this fact that sometimes God says yes to a journey and it goes pear-shaped and we're like, I'm not doing that again. But God wants us to step back into something because often it's man's execution of God's plan that goes wrong and not God's plan. And we're talking about that there's some things in our journey that God's inviting us to go back into because they were good and they were for us. So that's where we were. And we said, and that verse said this, it said, go and look at Jericho. What was he saying? He was saying, go and look at the biggest obstacle in your journey right now. Look at it and face it and allow God to build up confidence in taking it down. Okay, so that's where we were last week. And we are in chapter 2 again today. And we're going to move a little bit forward in that time. And so for those of you who haven't been with us, we are in the Old Testament and we are journeying with the Israelites from Egypt. Jackson alluded to Egypt earlier on. From Egypt, where they were in captivity, to the Promised Land, where they got to live in all the amazing abundance that God had for them. So they're on a journey and we're kind of in that journey with them. Right at the moment, they are standing, the whole nation is standing, looking at the Promised Land. They have a river called the River Jordan in front of them, and God's saying, go take the land. And there's a big impossibility in front of them. But all the way through, we've seen this journey of like, God says, this is yours, and he invites them to step out, even when they haven't seen what seen what God is going to do. He's like, will you say yes to the journey even when I can't see what's ahead? So that's where we are. And so we are at the beginning of chapter 2. And it's this truth that, his promises that he had for us aren't there for us just to wake up in the morning and go, God, thanks for all the promises. They're for actually us to fight for and step into and be like, no, joy is mine. I'm going to find what it looks like to live in joy because God said that's my portion, that's my promised land. The land of forgiveness. That's a really hard one to own sometimes, but God says, hey, in the light of my salvation, I've given you the ability to forgive every single person in your life. That's hard, but that's a land that you can live in if you allow God to take you on that journey. So that's where we are, and that's what we're looking at. And, every picture, every story in the Bible is also a picture of how we are in our lives right now. It's like this is what was happening to them, but we can relate it to us. And this is going to be very much in this story too. And so we are looking at one, just this chapter today. I'm going to do a whole chapter. Aren't I good? Whole chapter. There we go. And it's an interesting chapter. Alex, can you just pass me my water there? That'd be amazing. It's, thank you. It's an interesting chapter because you could easily skip chapter 2 and it not be there at all. Okay, you could go straight from chapter 1 to chapter 3 because it's about this big story picture of what God's doing with the whole nation of Israel. But we have chapter 2 there. And it's a side story. It's a side story in the midst of a bigger story. And I think it's an amazing picture of how God works in our stories and in our lives. God is in this big story journey about what he's doing on the earth here. It's massive, yet he has your story in mind on that journey as well. Everything in the Word tells us about the character of God. It tells us, in this chapter particularly, and many other stories in the Old Testament and the New Testament, tell me that God is the God of the macro, all right? He's the God of the universe. He's the creator of all things. He's the one that flung the stars into space. He's the one of the oceans. If you've gone to see the waves recently, they're huge. God is the God of the waves. God is the God of the mountains. Anyone see the amazing sky in the last week? God made that. That was his plan. And that night last week, he's like, hey, I'm going to give the people of Cornwall something beautiful to watch. That's him. That's what he does. Yet, he's also the God of the micro. I know if you've ever taken time to look at your fingerprints and the fact that every single one of your fingerprints is different from each other and different from anyone who was ever created on the earth. Isn't that crazy? And have you ever looked at the inside of a flower? Or have you ever got a microscope and kind of seen the universe within the universe of all the kind of living, alive things in a microscope? God is the God of the macro, and he's the God of the micro. And that's what he's like with us as well, the creator of life, the sustainer, the one who has the world in his hands. The one we call awesome, the one we call majestic, the one we call great and glorious. We've sung about it today. That God is the God of your story. He's the God of your story, your journey, your life, your day. He brought you here today. Did you know that? You thought it was your idea or your parents' idea, maybe. Or someone else that's kind of dragged you along here. No, that was his plan for your Sunday in October in 2024. That was his plan for your life. Everyone and everything in your life might be trying to convince you that actually you don't matter, that you're insignificant, that your journey is just one amongst everyone else's journeys. But I tell you, the Bible says, God is on your case. God is on your case. He wants to pause the macro journey of life to talk to you. Did you know, just like this chapter here, where he stops for one person, God has written a chapter about you. A chapter about your journey. How much he loves you. Your plan. His plan for you. It says in Isaiah, he says, I will not forget you. See, I have engraved you on the palm of my hand. Your name's written on the palm of his hand. You know, he has the ability to do something that we humans can't do. And that is, he zones in and he turns his attention on you whilst running the universe. Your thoughts, your questions, your pain, your unresolved hurt, your process, your favorite color, the things that make you laugh, the things that make you weep, the fact that you feel lonely in a crowded room, your fears, your ambitions, your dreams, they matter to him. They matter to him. And you know, whatever your week has been, even right now, he's talking to you. And listen, even now you might be going, I'm so glad you're saying this, Hannah, because that person right next to me really needs to hear that. No, he's talking to you right now. He's talking to you. Don't make this about everybody else. He is talking to you this morning. You know, we had a moment last week where I closed worship, and I just said this phrase over and over again. He loves you. He loves you. He loves you. If you remember it, it was last week. And someone wrote a testimony about that on Instagram. And they said this: I was at church yesterday, and the pastor kept saying this over and over. And it wasn't until the 6th time that I really began to hear it. How often we can listen to a truth but not hear it. For me, it was a powerful moment where I encountered the love of God. It's a truth I know and I live by it, make decisions on it, but something happened in that moment. And I felt like I was stopped by God. Like he really wanted me to pay attention to the fact that he loved me. Jackson started with Psalm 139 today, and I just want you to listen to what it says. It says, Lord, you know me. You know everything there is to know about me. You perceive every moment, every movement of my heart and soul. And you understand my very thought before it enters my mind. You are so intimately aware of me, Lord. You read my heart like an open book, and what you know all the words I'm about to say, even before I start a sentence. You know every step I will take before my journey even begins. You've gone into my future to prepare a way, and in kindness you follow behind me to spare me from the harm of my past. You have laid your hand on me. This is too wonderful, deep, and incomprehensible. Your understanding of me brings me wonder and strength? Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I hide and run and hide from your face? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I go down to the realm of the dead, you are there. If I fly with the wings in the shining dawn, you are there. If I fly into the radiant sunset, you still waiting there. Wherever I go, your hand will guide me. Your strength will empower me. It's impossible to disappear from you or to ask the darkness to hide me, for your presence is everywhere, bringing light to my darkness. You know, this morning, he wants to bring light to your darkness. The night to you is as bright as day. There's no difference between the two. You formed me in my innermost being, shaping my delicate inside, my intricate outside, and wove them all together in my mother's womb. Thank you, God, for making me so mysteriously complex. Have you ever said that before? Thank you, God, for making me so mysteriously complex. Everything you do is marvelously breathtaking. It simply amazes me to think about it. You know, when I was younger, we used to sing a song that said, I'm special because God has loved me, for he gave the best thing in his life to save me. And we had this contentious issue in our church because some people didn't like singing about the fact that I'm special. They thought it's a little bit kind of like, this is all about me. But you know, the truth is, the danger is, if we protect ourselves from the all about me, we miss the moment of, it's all about me. Did you know it's all about you? God made it all about you when Jesus came to earth to die for you. He made it all about you. Just close your eyes for a minute. I truly believe this morning that the love of God wants to come and make it all about your journey today. Make it about your chapter of what he's saying, inviting you to. And if you want to, just say to him right now, God, take me on that journey. Take me on that journey. I remember someone once saying, you know, God will come as close as you let him come. How close do you want him to be to you this morning? So in the story that we're talking about this afternoon, it's not this afternoon or this evening, this morning still, haven't preached for that long yet. We're talking about these two spies who are in Jericho spying, okay? And it says in chapter 2, verse 1, it says, and they went and came into the house of a prostitute whose name was Rahab, and they lodged there. This is the beginning of God zoning in on one person, and her name is Rahab. And right now, for those reading this long ago, and for the people telling this story, that's a little bit outrageous. Why? One, because she's a woman. In that culture right then, to stop for a woman is not what happens in their culture. And not only is she a woman, but she's a Gentile. That means she's not one of God's chosen people. She's an outsider to God's plan, so to speak. So she's a woman. She's an outsider. Not only is she just a woman and an outsider, but she comes from a tribe called the Amorites. Okay, the Amorites were the most vicious, the worst people, the worst tribe with the worst reputation you could possibly have. Okay? They worship their gods by sacrificing their children on altars of fire as a normal, regular thing to do. That's how far away from goodness that they were. They had temples where they had male and female prostitutes, that your worship with God was going into these places. That's where they were, and that's what they were like. So she is a woman. She was an outsider to God's chosen people. She was an Amorite. And then it says here that she's a prostitute. Kind of you're thinking, God, maybe a different person to tell a story about. But God's telling a story about her. God's telling a story about her. She would have been despised as the lowest of the low in her society. And God steps in for this moment. You know, you think you might have a good list of disqualifications right now to encounter the love of God. You might have some good qualifications for God not pausing his story for you. You might have your list. But I want to remind you this morning, there is no disqualification for the love of God. There is no disqualification. Nothing puts you outside of the realms of the love of God. Nothing. You might say to me, "Oh, Hannah, but you don't know me. You don't know me, Hannah. You don't know what thoughts I had this morning. You don't know about my past. You don't know about my inability to make good choices. You don't know what I do and think behind closed doors. The things that I've said to people I love, Hannah, you don't know. God knows. And he loves you. He doesn't just love you where you are. He knows where you are today. It's not that you've kind of like managed to give this good rep. You might be able to do that here. But God knows all about you. And he's like, hey, I love you this morning. The overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God is poured out on you this morning. You know, the reason why I'm kind of pressing this point and pausing and being like, do you know that? Is because I know in my life there's been moments where it's been so hard to let the love of God come close. So hard. You know, there's been moments where I'm like, yeah, God, I know that I'm forgiven of the things that I've done. I know. But I don't know how to open myself up again to your love. You know, it's like the prodigal son who comes home to the father and he's like, I will serve you the rest of my life. I will serve you. I will do all the things. I will be at church early every Sunday. I'll lay out the chairs. I'll do all the things. And God's like, hey, would you come up here and be my son and not be my servant? Some of us, we don't know how to make that transition. Because in our heads, we're still like, I'm forgiven, but I'm not forgiven. And you know, I believe in the recent days, I believe God's, when God comes, he stirs up the messiness, okay? When God comes, he kind of like points an invitation to the uncomfortable and the things that he wants to deal with. Has anyone felt that happening? And suddenly you can be like, whoa, like I suddenly feel all these things. And it's easy then to kind of start working hard to get all this sorted out rather than to go on a journey with him. You know, I remember a time for me, and it was a time, you know, when just life is just hectic. It's just a lot, And I remember I would come home from work and I would pour a glass of wine, and it's like, just relax for the evening. And then, a few weeks down the line, it would be like I'd pour 2 glasses of wine. And then it would grow, and it would grow, and it would grow. And I remember God putting a finger on it and beginning to invite me to change. Beginning to say, hey, what about this? And I remember that discomfort moment because I really didn't want to listen to it. It was like, yeah, I know, but, And it was this tender moment of invitation to the Lord of like, hey, do you want to be free from that? And I was standing in this moment of knowing it was a problem. If you stand in that moment too long, what God gives as a conviction becomes a condemnation. And what happens is that kind voice of God becomes a harsh voice of God. And instead of hearing an invitation from the Lord to grow and to become closer to Him, we begin to hear, hey, sort your life out. What's wrong with you? Come back when this is kind of dealt with, okay? And then we can talk. What's your issue? How dumb can you be that you have a problem that you can't deal with? And it becomes all wrapped up with hopelessness and judgment and feeling stuck and shame. We can be here on a Sunday morning and we can be inspired and like, yes, God, and walk out of this room and feel heaviness. I don't know if that's happened to any of you. You're like, I felt really excited about this journey. And then bang, come out of here and I'm like, this will never change. This will never change. Let me tell you this, if it doesn't smell of hope and it doesn't smell of the expectation of the goodness of God to crash in your life, it's not God. If it doesn't smell of hope, if it doesn't smell of the expectation of God to come and crash into your life and change it with His goodness and His mercy and His love, you've stopped listening to God and you've started listening to the deceiver who will tell you the lies that will never change you. I believe we're on this kind of like it's like a line moment. It's like God's convicting and He's inviting to change and He's excited about your life and you have all that you need to do that. But don't let it get like sour milk, that it's like, this has gone off. God's voice is always full of hope. Even if it's the conviction of the deepest kind, there is always an invitation to change and always an invitation for hope. The love of God is not the reward of your change. It is the resource for your change. And that's why we bring the love of God and allow it to come into us, to empower us to do what He's inviting us to do. See, the enemy will get you separated from the very thing that's going to transform your life. And you'll be trying to do stuff to get it, where it's like it's already yours. And let it inspire you and fuel you on the journey. Look to the person next to you and say, God really loves you. Some of you got to say that a few times. Look them in the eyes. God really loves you. Wow, you all sound so excited about it. It's incredible. The next bit of the passage says this. I find it. And they went to the house of the prostitute whose name was Rahab and lodged there. And it was told to the king of Jericho, behold, men of Israel have come here tonight to search out the land. Then the king of Jericho sent to Rahab, saying, bring out the men who have come to you and entered your house, for they have come to search out all the land. But the woman who had taken the 2 men and hidden them, and she said, "True, the men came to me, but I did not know where they were from. And when the gate was about to be closed in the night, the men went out. I do not know where the men are. Pursue them quickly, for you might overtake them." But she had brought them up to the roof and hid them in the stalks of flax that she had laid in order on the roof. So the men pursued after them on the way of the Jordan as far as the fords. The gate was shut as soon as the pursuers, were gone. Such an interesting story, because there's so much in it to get a little bit offended by. I don't know if you kind of have noticed that as you go along. You know, we're talking about a prostitute, which actually, when you read commentaries about it, it's really interesting how many people try and play that down. She had flax in her roof. Probably a farmer. Probably a farmer, really, prostitute on the side. No, she's a prostitute. God is talking about a prostitute here. She's a prostitute, and God is working through her. How about that? How about that? God didn't change her before he put her in the story. And then they stayed at her house. Like, really? Really, guys? I'm not sure that's really a good idea for your reputation. Did they just stay, or did they stay? Like, young men, did they say, there's different places here to get a little bit offended or a little bit like, well, I'm not sure that was a good idea. And then she lies twice. And not just to anyone, she lies to the king of her city. So she's not just a prostitute, she's a lying prostitute. Can you feel that invitation to pick out the things that you're like, well, I wouldn't do it that way? That's not very good. You know, when God is moving towards the salvation of people, we can do the same sometimes. Oh, that doesn't give us a good look. That's a bit messy. People are going to get the wrong idea if we go down that route. Let's just hold back a little. You know, when God begins to work in power, the opportunity to get offended by what he's doing will also increase. When God begins to work in power, when he comes with all of his holiness, all of his greatness and his goodness, the opportunity to get offended will also increase. And if I'm honest, I think that things will get messy at Engine House. Was that a nervous laugh, Olivia? Why? Because the presence of God is here. And when the presence of God is here, the lines aren't clear-cut anymore. And you know for yourself, when he begins to stir up things in your own life, things that you were laid back about, and now you feel like it is exciting, he's inviting you things. Sometimes it gets a bit messy before we get cleared up. Sometimes we have to say to the people closest to me, do you know what? You're thinking I've been like this for the whole of my life. I'm not. I'm not. And you give them an opportunity to either accept you in your mess or reject you. God's revealing labels like Rahab the prostitute. And you're like, I didn't even know I had a label of rejection in my life. But God's just pointed it out to you. And he reveals us if we carry on living in a place that's with a label that is robbing us. And we're like, Have you ever tried to get a label off a jar? It's one of the most hard things, isn't it? Like, I don't know who created labels and the sticky stuff that's on them, but it feels like that in our lives sometimes as well, doesn't it? It's like, God, Lord. Anyway, I don't know why I brought that into it. But anyway, I believe also, he's doing stuff in us, but he's also going to bring people in who are messy. if we are a place of presence and we are a place of love, people are going to come that need him. And people that need him are messy. And sometimes people are going to come to that door and we're going to be like, hey, can you take your label off, please, before you come in? Just take your shoes off at the door. I don't want any mud in here. Are we prepared for the presence of God to come and for us not to be offended by the messiness of the journey? You're going to want people to take their label off before they pray or before they sit next to you or before they go on this tea and coffee. Is it really good for them to be on the tea and coffee later? I'm not sure. Are we happy for people to say, I'm part of Engine House Church when they haven't got their life in order? You know, God wasn't worried about the label on Rahab. In fact, when you read about her in Hebrews, he calls her Rahab the prostitute. James, when James is writing about her, hundreds of years later, he's still saying Rahab the prostitute. Why? Because it agitates something in us. Just call her Rahab. God, come on. Doesn't look good. But in 1 Samuel, it says, man looks at the outward appearance, but God looks on the heart. You know, the only people that had an issue with Jesus when he walked around the earth was the Pharisees. The people who were obsessed with looking good and ticking boxes of rightness. Listen, you protect your integrity and God will protect your reputation to the people that matter. And we as a church, we protect our integrity. God will protect our reputation where it matters. You know, sometimes there'll be moments where we feel super misunderstood or super misrepresented. And we'll get to stand before God and be like, are we good? Is my heart good? Are my intentions good? And he'll say yes. And I'll say that I'm okay. Then I'm okay. Are we good? Verse 8 says this, before the men lay down, she came up to them on the roof and said to the men, I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the fear of you has fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants in the land melt away before you. You know, what's amazing about this is Rahab wasn't just an old prostitute. She was a woman that had more faith in their God than they do. She had more faith in their God to save them than they did. They were there seeking out the land. Oh, is this going to be okay? Are we going to be all right? She's there looking on, saying, your God is awesome. Isn't that crazy? She saw something that they couldn't do. She went on, she says, for we have heard that the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea. That was like 40 years ago. Before you, when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you devoted to destruction. And as soon as we heard it, our hearts melted, and there was no spirit left in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, he is the Lord of the heavens above and the earth beneath. She had a revelation of God. How? By watching them walk through the wilderness with him. By watching him walk through the wilderness with him. Just as God didn't change Rahab before he put her in his story, here we find God displaying himself in their wilderness season in a way that pointed to his greatness. A place where they had no home of their own. They were going around the same mountains. It was dusty. It was dirty. They had the same thing for breakfast, the same thing for dinner, the same thing for tea. And yet, Rahab watched their journey and was absolutely in awe of the God that they served. Some of us are waiting till we get to the promised land before we believe that God can display his glory in our lives. When I get this sorted out, God, you'll be able to lead me. God, when I get rid of this trauma in my life, when I walk through my marriage issues, when my kids are all walking with the Lord, when I'm financially stable, and when I'm settled and established in my faith, then I have something to give. Bring it on, God. Do you know what? It's been in some of the most disastrous moments of my life where God has been with me and others have watched from a distance and said, God is with you. You know, I remember our dad, a couple of years ago, our dad had a sickness, had an illness, degenerative. He passed away a couple of Februarys ago. And horrible journey. And my brother, who doesn't know the Lord, was with my dad through that journey and watched him suffer, watched him consistently have peace with God, watched him in all of the hardness of the journey. My brother is marked by my dad's journey in a way that his theological discussions would never mark him. He is marked by my dad's journey in his suffering. And one day, I believe that will be a catalytic thing when he comes to salvation, which he hasn't done yet. But that will be part of it. Now, you might dismiss that and be like, oh, suffering sucks. Do you know what? When God walks with you through suffering, when you say, surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, you know, through the valley of the shadow of death, when you can do that, I tell you that the world looks on and sees the God of your wilderness season as much as he does when you're on the mountaintop. In fact, I think sometimes more. And we have to stop dismissing our journeys and waiting to get to certain places before we can be confident that God can be glorified through our journey. It's not about you, it's about who he is in the journey. You know, even with Jesus, it was when he was on the cross dying, feels like a disaster moment, that the centurion looked at him and said, surely that man was the Son of God. There's a revelation moment. It wasn't in his resurrection moment. It was in his dying moment. It was how he died. We get to be confident in the fact that God has the ability to shine his light through our imperfections and the imperfection of the others around me, and that he can be glorified through that. You know, often we don't bring God to others because we're waiting for that moment. But what if someone asked you, how was your weekend? You could say, well, do you know what? It really sucked. It's really hard. But you don't know what? I felt God in the midst of it in peace in a way that was really incredible. Or I was feeling super lonely, and then I got my Bible out, and I just heard what God said about me, and how the fact that he's with me changed my weekend. Your testimony in trial is as powerful as your testimony in triumph. And you know, his glory, his reputation is based on his faithfulness, not in your ability to be faithful. It's based on his faithfulness, time and time again. That's what shines through. In verse 12, it says this, "Now then," this is Rahab talking still, "please swear to me that by the Lord, that as I have dealt kindly with you, you will also deal kindly with my father's house, and give me a sure sign that you will save alive my father, brother, mother, sister, all the ones, and all who belong to them, and deliver our lives from death." She's asking to be saved from this coming kind of destruction that she knows is going to happen to her city. And the men say to her, "Our life is yours, even in death. If you do not tell this business of us, then when the Lord gives us the land, we will deal kindly to you, kindly and faithfully with you." You know, what I find fascinating about Rahab at this moment is she has a grasp of his greatness, his holiness, his power, but he also has this grasp of his goodness and his mercy and his faithfulness. She's like, I know if I reach out, there's salvation for me in this moment. She had a revelation of his great, like, we're nailed. God's people are coming. We're nailed, but there's mercy for me. There's mercy for me. And you know, you have to have both. You really have to have both. You know, if you just have his grace and his goodness, you will feel super loved, but powerless to change. You'll feel super loved, but powerless to change. And then if you have his greatness and his holiness and his power, without his goodness and his kindness and his love, you will change out of fear and not out of love. And you will live out of the servant's quarters rather than as a son and a daughter. You know, if you read the rest of the story, she lets them down by a rope and they escape. And they go back home, but they give her some instructions in verse 18, and it says this, "Behold, when we come into the land, you shall tie this scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down, and we shall gather in, and you shall gather into your house your father, your mother, your brothers, and all your father's household." So basically, when we come to attack the city, drop this scarlet cord outside your window, and we'll protect your house. And she says in verse 21, she said, "According to your words, so be it." Then she sent them away, and they departed, and she tied the scarlet cord on the window. You know, we're all invited to a Rahab moment where we see his greatness, and we see his goodness and his love, and we petition God, "God, would you rescue me from the walls of captivity that I'm living in? God, would you rescue me from the labels I've engraved or other people have engraved on my life?" And you know, just like that scarlet cord that she dropped down from her window, God sent a rescuer for us. And it wasn't a scarlet cord, but it was the blood of Jesus that became our rescue. That became our rescue. Why? Because he loves you, and he considered your freedom, your wholeness, your healing to be worth the price it was paid for. Verse 23, it said this, "They came down from the hills and passed over and came to Joshua the son of Nun, and they told him all that had happened to them. And they said to Joshua," this is the spies, "Truly, the Lord has given all the land into our hands, and also all the inhabitants of the land melted away because of us." You know, for the spies, they thought that mission was going to evaluate the size of Jericho and the lay of the land and to get a plan together. And actually, the plan was to give them a revelation of the greatness of God. The plan all along was to give them a revelation of his greatness, his goodness, and his mercy, which is everything you need to conquer the stronghold that stands right in front of you. It is everything that you need. And you know, for Rahab, this is just the start of the journey. Because if you look in Matthew 1, you'll see that her name appears in the bloodline of Jesus. She is in the bloodline of Jesus. And actually, you'll notice that most people in that bloodline to Jesus have a messy, clunky, awkward story. But God chose to bring Jesus through the messy, clunky, imperfect story of Rahab. And what I want to invite you to today is to believe that God can bring Jesus through you too. Not when you get to a moment when you have everything together, but right now. Right now. Whether you feel you're in a mountaintop moment or a wilderness one, the invitation is to say yes to him right now. To say yes to him right now. If you just stand for a moment, we're going to just go in to respond to this moment. Some of you might be kind of new to this journey with God. And you might be here this morning thinking, that's just a lot. But you felt the love of God this morning. Well, that's where it starts. It doesn't start with understanding. It starts with encountering his love. And you know that moment, whether it's an extraordinary peace in your heart, or whether it's like an unsettling or a stirring, or a wanting to laugh or a wanting to cry. Whether it's like a heaviness of like a weighted blanket of love, or whether you feel lighter than you've ever felt before, the Lord is pursuing you with his love today. And the first part of that journey is to say yes. God, I want you to find me. I want you to find me. Some of you are heavy with that moment of disqualification because you feel like there are so many labels over your life. Whether you've put them there or somebody else. And you're like that person who's kind of trying to get the label off the jar. And God's like, oh, my love will do that. My love will do that. And you get to come to him today and say, God, I want to be defined by the love of God, not by any other label in my life. God, would you help me to do that? Would you help me to go on that journey? And I believe that the power of God is going to come in this room today, is coming in this room together right now. And he is saying it's the end right now of that thing that you have spoken over your life. And I'm going to give you a new name. My son, my daughter, perfectly loved. Perfectly known. He knows everything about you, perfectly known and perfectly loved. And And for others of you, it's rising up that expectation of whether I'm in the wilderness or the mountaintop, I'm going to believe that the glory of God is in me, and he wants to birth Jesus through me to the lives of others. Whatever that is for you this morning, I pray that as we worship, you would lean in to having a conversation with him. Lean into a new level of surrender. Lean into a yes that maybe you've not said. And if you need to respond in any way, if you need prayer, there's going to be some people over here to my left. If you need to just be like, no, God, I just want to do business with you today, then just come to the front here and just kneel at the front and just let it be you and him. But yeah, thanks God.